And the day that the Northern Ireland regulations were due to be debated upstairs, I'd got on the statutory instrument to go up and debate it. It seemed clear to me, because I'd been asking him over the last few, the previous few weeks, that there was going to be an exemption granted for, or they were thinking, or he was thinking, of granting an exemption for adoption and access to goods and services for LGBT people. And I remembered what had happened with our employment regulations, where at the last minute, after a consultation process, behind everybody's backs, the bishops went to Downing Street and got an exemption. Now, it's a narrow exemption, but it still shouldn't be there. And nobody knew it was happening until it had happened. And the difficulty with a statutory instrument with secondary legislation, I promise not to get too technical about this, is that you have to vote, it's all or nothing. You have to vote for all of it or none of it. You can't amend it. And so by the time they had the employment exemption in the statutory instrument, I hadn't got wind of it, none of us knew it was going on. And we then had to vote for it, imperfect though it was, or have nothing at all. And so I thought, well, we're not going to get caught like that again. And there were various other people, many of them in the cabinet, who felt the same way. Alan Johnson was one of them, as it happens with this. And so we realised that there was a chance that there'd be a similar issue, or a similar deal done on goods and services protection with respect to adoption. It narrowed down to the most emotive thing, and it was the Catholic Church that were doing it. And I have very many good friends who are Catholics, don't get me wrong, including my new civil partner. And I'll go on and say a few words about that in a minute, but actually we were ready for them this time, and it was clear from my discussions with the then Prime Minister that they were on the verge of thinking to have an exemption. And so after asking him, I had a very robust conversation with him, let's put it that way. And after that, I went straight upstairs after realising that there was an issue here. Before I got upstairs, I was assailed by one of the members of the Parliamentary Committee from the Lords, Cathy Ashton, who's now gone to Europe, who's exactly the same opinion as me and a very good networker in the Lords, who said, we're not having this. And I said, give me your phone number, and you go off and sort everybody out in the cabinet from that end, and I'll go off and sort everybody out in the cabinet from my end, and let's just keep in touch. And we blocked it, and we said, because it has to be agreed around government, and we stopped it happening. Not only did we stop it happening, we knew it couldn't go through. There was no agreement. I had to go and see Ruth Kelly. Meeting of the minds, as you might imagine. Meanwhile, I went upstairs while all that was being organised, and there we had the statutory instrument for Northern Ireland, the first one that had to be passed, the Grant Goods and Services Protection. Similar to the grounds on religion that they have in Northern Ireland, but in this instance, where I was lectured by an irate unionist about how I'd made this lifestyle choice of being gay, and how it wasn't in the Bible, and all the usual arguments that you will have heard all too often. They go down quite well in bits of Northern Ireland, but they didn't go down well in the committee that we had. We had some good representation on our committee. 2 or 3 of us, I think Chris Bryant was there as well. And it's well worth reading the Hansard if you ever have a few minutes. But we were able to get up and say, well, it's not a lifestyle choice if you're a gay person. It's the way you are. In fact, I think choice of religion is possibly more of a choice. I don't know whether that's an extreme thing to say, but anyway, we were able to pass that piece of legislation and grant that access to rights in Northern Ireland initially, while we carried on battling for what was going to happen with the adoption agencies in the UK. And it was then that we got onto this extraordinary round of media interviews with the Catholic Church. A few days later, when they basically issued almost a blackmail note that got on the front pages of the newspapers, I knew we'd won. because that couldn't have been given in the way it was put. The interesting thing that started to happen then was that I started to get contacted by members of the Catholic adoption agencies themselves, who worked in the Catholic adoption agencies, who were saying to me, we want to be inclusive. We want to be inclusive. It's the priests that are doing this. And then I realised, actually, that the vast majority, and this is what my partner had been telling me, I have to say, that the vast majority of Catholics don't actually mind this at all. It's an official position taken by those who are trying to impress the Vatican. An official church doctrine position. It's not actually a pragmatic position that most Catholics would agree with. And so they started giving me information. I then realised that actually the people that were, the bishops who were making these arguments didn't have their own church behind them in terms of the lay, which gave me heart in the battle that we had ahead. And then I realised, as I did media after media with bishops and things, that they won't appear with you. They insist on appearing separately to pontificate, and you have to answer them or afterwards. When the Newsnight interview, I don't know whether any of you remembered it, with Paxman, I went on to talk about equality. The Bishop of Birmingham was on down the line, and Paxman tore him to bits. And all I had to do was sit there and try not to look too gleeful while it was going on, and then make all of the appropriate arguments. And we stopped that statutory instrument being amended in a way that granted us equal access, including to adoption services. Now, when we went upstairs to do that statutory instrument, large numbers of conservative backbenchers who weren't officially on that particular statutory instrument, you get appointed to do these things, turned up anyway, because you can turn up and speak but not vote. And there were about 50 of them turned up, led by people like Edward Lee and John Redwood and people like that, who started saying, well, this will mean that if you have equal access to goods and services, doesn't that mean that a man's suit shop will have to sell women's dresses and all of this rubbish? And so I was shouting out to John Redwood that he'd look lovely in a dress. It should all be in Hansard. But it just brought home to me, I mean, firstly, the rightness of what we were doing. It's obvious. You don't need to be a genius to work out that equality is a good thing to have, and that nobody should be discriminated against in the provision of services, good services that are paid for by public money, which we're all entitled to equal access to. I don't see why that's such a difficult issue to deal with. But then it also struck me how reactionary a lot of the Tory benches still were. Even though the front bench was saying something, that they weren't against it, didn't like it very much, but they weren't going to be against it. But actually, large numbers of the backbenchers were. Then a bit later on, in some of the changes in the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Act, as now is, we got into this discussion about the need for a father in access to fertility treatment. And it's quite interesting then, because you get the reasonable people on all parts of the political spectrum coming up to talk to you about lesbians and, you know, what is this about not having a father, and feeling very threatened, some of them, that fathers might be excluded. And you have to explain that actually this is about access to fertility services, not about asking you what your personal predilections are, or who you know, it's quite interesting, that whole debate about need for a father. I really appreciate it. You don't often get given awards in politics. It's brickbats rather than awards, and so I do appreciate it, and thank you also for lunch and the company. But all I'd say to you is we should celebrate the progress we've made. We should make sure that we don't lose what we've got. We should spend time ensuring that the rights that we've managed to win actually become a reality, an everyday reality for LGBT people in